Today on The Game Adventure, we are asking hard questions like, is $900 too much for a console? How about a current-gen console? How long should a studio survive off of one game? And what is the art behind a video game remake or remaster? Let's dive in. The Game Adventure Podcast is a weekly, family-friendly show keeping you up to date on all the latest news in video games. We'll also mix in a heavy dose of nostalgia with retro games and even things like how the worlds of tech and culture and even faith interact with video games as an art form. We're doing it all in less than an hour every Saturday morning, so let's get started. What is up, everybody? Thanks so much for joining me again for the Game Adventure Podcast. It really has been a joy to do this every week for the last couple of weeks, and I can't wait to do it into the future as well. So this has been kind of a wild week with a lot of news. There was the Xbox partner preview that posted later in this last week, and lots of upcoming games were kind of shown off in that, and that was exciting. There's a couple of kid-friendly games, actually, that I'm pretty stoked about. There was a Bluey game that my kids might force me to get, especially the younger ones, because it's more about taking pictures, it sounds like. We'll have to kind of look into that more in the future, because that could be a good one for younger kids. In response to my question from a couple weeks back, there's also a game coming out called Frog Squad, which says basically you work with your friends to explore the sewers and secure food for the Swamp King. It looks like a very fun art style. Man, I think my kids could actually get really excited about that one as well. And definitely there's a few for the older folks in your home. The Expanse video game, if you ever read the Expanse novels or watched the TV show, that looks like it could be a lot of fun, and a couple of other titles as well that we'll talk about later. So it's been an exciting news, especially if you're an Xbox fan. Not so much an exciting week for news if you are an employee at Epic Games. Let's go ahead and dive into the industry headlines. So the big news this week that actually made it all the way to main news platforms, I was surprised to actually see this on the news, was that Epic Games, who is the studio behind Fortnite, laid off 1,000 employees. That is, for reference, about 25% of their workforce. That's like a quarter of all the people there. And basically, the CEO said they were spending more than they were making, and they had to close down some of the studio in order to conserve cash to continue running. The remaining staff at the studio expressed really deep uncertainty. They can't even really understand the impact that this will have on the game, especially because they were only in the news a little while ago for raising the price of their virtual currency called V-Bucks. Some of the conversation around this, like why this happened, was essentially that the Fortnite universe had definitely slowed down in growth. The primary drivers behind the closure is what the analysts were saying anyway, was this is an overinvestment of Epic Games, which the Epic Games store has remained pretty unprofitable. They kind of tried to go head-to-head with Steam and ultimately lost, because that is what happens when you go head-to-head with Steam. Hint, hint, Microsoft, be very careful about the direction that you're taking your games as well. If you go head-to-head with Steam, you're going to run into problems. So essentially, they have overpaid for a bunch of stuff. They've spent a lot of money that apparently they didn't have to actually pay, by which I mean they didn't have as much available as they thought. They actually tried to sue Apple a couple years ago with this like 30% Apple tax, and that they really didn't like, which basically means if you buy a game on Apple's App Store, you pay a 30% tax to Apple for using their platform. It's right there in the print. Everybody knows this, and they didn't like that. And so they went to battle with them in court, and basically Apple won. Even though the court did rule that Apple had to allow developers to point users to outside payment systems to minimize how much they did that. So the conversation in the industry seems to be very much against people like Tim Sweeney, who is Epic's CEO, especially around the mismanagement of the funds of the studio and where they're spending money. They're kind of chasing this infinite growth of what they want for Fortnite to perform. I think my take on this is, first of all, it's super sad that you have that many, think about that many employees who were previously making video games and were a part of this like process of creating a world that a lot of people have enjoyed. I haven't played a lot of Fortnite myself, but I know it's obviously been very, very popular for a long time. My second thought, though, on this is that it came out in 2018. So we're talking about an 8-year-old game. And if they're really going to use the line that the users or the players on the game have been going down, and they're surprised by that at 8 years into the game, having really not changed a whole lot substantially other than to add characters and modes into the game, I wonder if it's maybe time for a new IP, perhaps, Epic Games. Maybe it's time for the successor to Fortnite. Maybe you need to do what virtually everybody else in the game industry has been doing for decades now and coming out with the next game in order to continue being creative and creating a space for players that they want to play in ongoing. I can tell you personally, I'm not going to be jumping in to playing Fortnite, mostly because I don't want to get crushed by 8-year-olds who are way better at video games than I am, but also because at this point, I'm not going to jump into an 8-year-old game and try to get started in it. I'm looking for something to come into brand new. That's my take. For right or wrong, that's what it is. The next piece of news, also another studio closure. PlayStation has closed down, or Sony rather, has closed down Dark Outlaw Games, which was a first-party studio, actually, that was led by the former Call of Duty producer, Jason Blundell. This kind of has become a trend with closures of things like Blue Point Games a little while ago, Firewalk Studios, Naughty Dog's multiplayer team, lots and lots of closings. I think a lot of studios in the game industry are trying to find out who are we, what are we going to be about, and how can we afford to continue doing that with the team that we have right now. So I don't think it's a lack of talent at the team level, the people that are actually doing the work. It seems like there's tons of very talented people there. I don't think it's a shortage of ideas. I think it's the corporate side trying to figure out how do we remain profitable without taking too much risk in an environment where everything is essentially a little bit risky with the economy where it's at, everything that's happening in the world. And unfortunately, the decision that they're deciding to make around that is the least risky thing that I can do is let go of some of my employees, which I actually believe might be the most risky thing because there is no way you're going to get that level of talent back again after closing down those studios. Finally, we have the Xbox strategy, kind of Project Helix we've talked about. We've also talked a little bit about Asha Sharma, who is Microsoft's new gaming CEO, the leader of their Xbox program. And basically, she this week said this is an Xbox campaign, if you remember that, where they started to show like a phone and a computer and a TV. This is an Xbox, they said. I think I even posted on my social media a picture of the Steam box, and I said, this is an Xbox. Xbox, this is what you're doing to us. You're telling us that we don't need an Xbox, which stinks if you're a fan of the Xbox. And she recognized that, which I think is cool, because when you're in a position like Asha Sharma, and you have probably a lot of people breathing down your neck to produce solid results, to be able to say, I think we made a mistake in marketing, and we're going to kill it. I think that takes a lot of bravery. So, hey, points to you for making a good call there. She's trying to refocus the brand. She's also talking about making Game Pass more affordable by potentially introducing a lower priced tier. I think that's amazing. If we can get more people more access to at least a core number of games for them to play, I think that's a good thing. Even though I've voiced my thoughts on whether or not we should have these like subscription packages in the first place, whether that's good for the developers or not, that's a different conversation. But hey, making your games more accessible to more people, love that. So that's pretty much the news. Let's go ahead and jump into the tech bulletin. What's happening in the world of tech this week? Lots of the talk in the tech world, especially around video games this week, has been about pricing. And I think this is something we definitely need to return to, talk about at some point. So basically the PlayStation came on the news quite a bit, even like main channel news sources, because they are raising their prices. We're talking about substantial raising of prices. So if you remember, the PS5 launched in 2020 for $499. That console today, now in every case so far, you're usually seeing the current gen console is becoming less and less expensive. So if you were willing to wait a couple of years, in this case 6 years, you could snag that console for a lot less. However, with price raises now, that $499 console in 2020 is now $650. So it is 30% more expensive than it was at launch. And the big piece of news was that the PS5 Pro is going up to $900, which does mark a new ceiling for console pricing. That is the most expensive console that you can buy right now. But if this trend continues, maybe not for long. This is kind of crazy. I actually just got an email from my friend Matt, and I'll be reading that. He has a really interesting take on this. I'm going to get him on the show one of these days because he is a lover of video games. He's a big fan of Sony, which is more than me, actually. I like Sony, but I'm not a PS5 guy. And so he also is developing his own game. So I'm going to get him on the show one of these days. Matt, I'm coming for you. But he has a take that I'm actually going to read on next week's show about the price jump in particular and why we talk about this so much. So I'll save that for next week. And let's move on to the Switch 2 production. Was actually announced that they were bringing the Switch 2 production down a little bit. So they experienced lackluster holiday performance, even though the Switch 2 has sold incredibly well. They are reportedly cutting production of the Switch 2 by about 33% this quarter. Now, do with that what you will. I think Nintendo is doing everything they can to try to keep the prices of their hardware down, even if that means cutting production for a little while. Also, this time of year, it's not surprising to have some cuts in production. Not a lot of people are running out to get a new gaming system in this economy, at least, before tax season actually hits. April into summer could end up being a really big sales time for consoles, especially if some consoles are going up in price and Nintendo manages to keep theirs where it is. I think that could actually pay off for them. But definitely going into third and fourth quarter, you see a lot of sales uptick in that time. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they ramp things back up again at that point. The next piece of news around pricing, lots of pricing news this week, is that Nintendo is maintaining this digital first discount. So what they're doing is they're discounting by about $10 the digital copy of first party Switch 2 games, which some people made a big deal about. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think they should have done this years ago. I have always maintained that a digital version of the game should be less expensive than the physical version because, first of all, from a piece of, a business point of view, it costs more money to produce a physical product than it does a digital. And second, the consumer is actually getting less when they get a digital copy instead of a physical copy. You're not getting the little book that comes along with it, which they stopped putting in there anyway years ago. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of incentive to buy physical copies when half of the game cards they give me are just a key to download the software. That's my point of view, but I actually like the fact that they're finally showing this by discounting the digital product by $10. Also, if you're willing to just buy the digital version, you're getting in at a lower price point, which is always good, especially as a dad with kids who eat a lot of food. I think that the controversy we talked about last week with DLSS 5 did make it back into the news again because we talked about AI being used to basically remake the frames, and essentially NVIDIA said, yes, we're going to admit that it does actually physically redraw the 2D frames using AI motion vectors. It is not just scaling. So there was some backlash against that again. I give them props for at least saying that, yeah, this is the truth. It actually is doing what you think it's doing. It's AI remaking what a person has made, which actually puts me pretty firmly in the camp of not a fan. Not a fan of this, guys. It might look pretty cool at first, but when you realize this is now an AI image that you're being fed and not the real thing, somehow that's less interesting to me. I would prefer the current technology that the human artists have made the best use of in creating the game. That's what I want to see. Because part of why I play games, like I said last week, is I want to connect with people. And I want to connect with the people that have made this art form in a certain way too. When I go to see a famous artwork, I want to see the actual artwork hanging in the museum. I don't want to see just a print. And I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because I'm an artist and I do prints of my work. But honestly, most people, myself included, I want to see the original. I don't want to see a picture of the original that's been touched up in Photoshop. Come on. So anyway, I'm glad that they were at least honest about that. But what the DLSS 5 technology ends up being used for remains to be seen. That'll be interesting to see kind of how the industry responds to the backlash against it. Let's go ahead and jump into my point of view piece for the week, which is looking at the art of the remaster and remake. The last couple of years have been a season of a lot of remasters and remakes of games, definitely playing into the nostalgia factor for people like me who grew up playing games and want to play them again, and they're not always available on the current gen platform. So here's my kind of thesis, my thought here is that the success of a game's return, whether that is as a remaster or a remake, and we'll define those in a second, is not determined by technological upscaling, but actually by artistic intentionality. A really good revisit to a game has to honor the original soul of the story and the experience, utilizing modern tools to fulfill the original creator's vision rather than just chasing a paycheck. And we've seen examples of both of those over the last couple of years. So first, let's talk about the remaster. What is a remaster? A remaster should be a preservationist approach. The goal here is to create the definitive version of an existing game for modern hardware. So the core audience is mostly fans that are fueled by nostalgia and players who are looking for a piece of gaming history. It acts as kind of this like memory enshrinement that makes games accessible that would otherwise be lost to what's sometimes called hardware rot. My old console stops working, and now suddenly I can't play this favorite game that I had. A good example of this, I think, is the Master Chief Collection. It serves as kind of the industry's best example of allowing players to play something that is a pure remaster of the original. You could even, in that game, switch back and forth between the original graphics and the new graphics, the anniversary or updated assets in real time. Proving that you can actually have both exist simultaneously. They hadn't changed enough that you couldn't do that. I thought that was really cool. Now, a remake has a little bit different. This is a goal. It's a reimagining kind of approach. So the goal is to transport the story and the characters and that core feeling that you got into the current era as if it were being made for the first time today. So the core audience here, I think, is usually new players who might find older mechanics kind of a slog, and also probably veterans of the game that are wanting to see this original version fully realized without the technical constraints that they would have run into back in the day when they were making it. I see this, a good opportunity for this that hasn't been taken advantage of so far is the Virtual Boy. So historical failures are often the best candidates for remakes. Using like the Switch 2 gyroscope technology and VR could actually fulfill that 3D promise of the 1995 hardware that was like physically painful to use. So I think there's some cool opportunity there. If you can think of like the wallpapers for iPhone that you can move the iPhone around and it looks like it's shifting, that could be a good kind of simulation of 3D that we have today that would work fantastic for something like the Virtual Boy games that are kind of trapped on that hardware, now available as a part of the Nintendo Switch Online, but also not great to look at still. I think an example for potential of this happening is also the new Halo remake. So this is Halo Campaign Evolved. I think this could be awesome. It's bringing back iconic voices. We've got Steve Downs coming back, Jen Taylor coming back as Cortana, but utilizing the Unreal Engine 5 to deliver kind of the scale and the feel that the original team could only have dreamt of in 2001, and dreamt beautifully of, I will say, because they brought that to life on that day's technology better than any other game that I can think of. So the most dangerous trap for the modern remake or remaster is to say that better graphics equals a better game. And certainly you can improve on the game sometimes by making the graphics sharper or more true to their original version or the dream behind that version. But just because you have better graphics, it doesn't necessarily make it a better game. I'll give you an example. Animation and pixel art are distinct art forms. They're not like an incomplete version of realism. Just like a CGI, quote, live action Lion King loses the soul of the hand-drawn animation when you try to remake it with 3D models. Remaking pixel art in 3D often kind of destroys the aesthetic intent that was so appealing to games in the first place. My kids still play Game Boy Advance games. They think the graphics are fantastic. I agree, because there was intent behind making them look the way that they did. My son just told me the other day, I love playing these games on the Game Boy Advance on the Nintendo Switch Online because I love that pixelized art style. He didn't know what it was called. I said, oh yeah, that's called pixel art. He's like, I love the look of that. So I think about kind of those games as a good example of graphics being good doesn't mean that graphics are modern. That's not the same thing. So that's kind of a trap that you have to avoid falling into. How do I reinterpret this in the best possible way? Another thing that you can do with like an update is to make it more accessible, to make basically a difficulty scale so that you can play something all the way through without dying hundreds of times and being angry at the game and maybe breaking your video game controller, right? These are things that we've experienced in the past. Maybe that's not what we want to put our kids through. I don't know. Maybe it would be character building for them. I could have an argument either way on that. Maybe that's a future topic. I think about like the Dragon Quest III remakes and how they streamlined that 100-hour campaign into a 40-hour experience, which is something that I might actually be able to play through. There's no way I'm playing through a 100-hour Dragon Quest game as an adult with the things going on that I have going on, and probably you do too. So I actually kind of like the idea. Yeah, strip it down to just kind of a more basic experience so that I still get the story. 40 hours is still a significant amount of time without losing that narrative core. So the question is, who is best suited to do this? The industry seems to be leaning in a scary way right now where they're saying, I think we can use AI for this. A technical upscale can be automated. But the question is a technical upscale, or if you're using technology that recreates the visuals using AI, is that really the remake or the remaster that we're looking for? I don't think so. I think there is a human factor that has to go into this, because when we're trying to preserve the original soul of what made the game great, you need human beings to do that, because only we can tell you what our experience was like. AI doesn't know what it felt like to sit on your gross basement carpet with 3 of your best friends playing a video game on a tube TV while their mom made breakfast for you upstairs. Like, no AI is able to take that feeling and say, what's important about this and how do I drag it into the modern day? So I think a big test of this is going to be what we're hearing rumors about, this Ocarina of Time being remade for the Switch 2 this year. This kind of just broke over the last couple of days. The stakes are pretty high. They're going to require a really delicate balance, because If it tries to stay too true to the original in every way, it's going to end up feeling pretty clunky compared to Breath of the Wild. And if they try to change it too much, it risks losing the art form and the soul that made it the highest rated game of all time. So if there's anybody that can pull this off, I got to say, I think it's Nintendo, but we will wait and see. With that, let's jump into, appropriately, the Retro Rewind. It's honestly hard to talk about retro games without touching on the idea of the ROM. ROM is basically the software version of a game that is how you would play it on the original console, but you can also have software called an emulator that you run on a computer, a handheld, even an iPhone, that basically says, I'm going to pretend to be a Game Boy and play that original software, and the software says, a Game Boy, this is what plays me. And so that's how you can play old games. Now, this is kind of a controversial thing. Okay, it's really a controversial thing within the gaming community, because what this has led to is a lot of piracy, where people will take games that they don't own and download them from sites on the internet and play them, instead of, in some cases, buying them from the company that makes it. So it's one thing when you're downloading a 30-year-old game that doesn't exist anymore, and the hardware to play it doesn't exist anymore either, or at least not in mass, not something you can actually get. It's one thing to take that game and play it on your computer because of the nostalgia, the time that you enjoyed the game back in the day. It reminds you of being a kid. That's one thing. It's another thing to say, a game that came out yesterday, I don't want to pay $70 for it, and so I'm going to jump onto a website where I'm going to download that software and play it on my gaming PC. There's where clearly one is the problem and the other is not so much a problem. If we're going to think about this like morally, is one actually breaking the law? Yeah. Are both of them technically breaking the law? Potentially. But one is definitely taking money out of the hands of the people that made the game, and the other is certainly not. So in between those exists this kind of gray area of what should we do and what shouldn't we do. I kind of have my own specific thoughts on this that I'm hesitant to get into in a place like this because it's a matter for debate. It's a matter to talk about and kind of work out what is the right thing to do with this. And into the news this week came the coverage of the Myriant Archive, which was a site that held a lot of ROMs, is closing down because of the massive size of their library and the cost of keeping it actually up in a environment where storage costs a lot of money, even server storage to run something like that. And so it's closing down. So that was the piece that was in the news. And I guess my take on this, or thing that's worth thinking about for those of you who are in the industry, is the reason that people, or at least the people that you should care about the most, are not the people who don't want to pay you $60 for a video game and therefore are downloading it from a website. That's decidedly wrong. The people that you should be thinking about, though, when it comes to ROMs, is the people who would pay you for this game if they could. If you made it available to them again, they would pay you for it. So like Nintendo, it would be good if you made more of your back library available to us, even if we had to buy it instead of subscribe to a service, because people would do that, and they would gladly do that to have it on the hardware that they wanted it on. Companies should really fight piracy by providing easy, legitimate access through their digital libraries and even physical cartridge remakes. Imagine if Nintendo said, we're going to go ahead and make the Game Boy again and make cartridges again specifically for the nostalgia factor and for people like me who have kids that want to introduce their kids to Game Boy games without having to figure out the whole emulator setup, which I have gone through. And man, that's a lot of work for sometimes a little bit of reward. So a couple of retro pieces that are kind of worth talking about, specifically the RG Vita, which is an Anbernic piece of hardware Anbernic is a company based in China that makes these pieces of hardware that basically look and feel like the original Game Boy hardware. They've made one for the Game Boy Advance. They've made one that's very similar to the Vita, but it's an Android under the hood. And so it plays these games. One of the pieces of hardware that I have is actually it's called the Thor. It's by a company called AYN, and it's a dual screen handheld. And so it allows you to actually play dual screen games from certain companies that you may have really loved and owned back in the day and can no longer easily get a hold of. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Thor is fantastic. You can use it for modern games as well. It is basically a really powerful Android device with two screens. But the other thing that was in the news this week around retro news was something called, it's called The Captain, which is awesome. I think it's kind of a nod to the Duke, which was a nickname for the original giant Xbox controller. But a company called Mod Retro and Hyperkin are releasing this piece of hardware that's basically a transparent wired N64 style controller, which is going to match up to a console that they are releasing that is an emulating console, similar to these emulation handhelds that let you play your handheld games. It's going to be an actual console, and they're making this like N64 looking thing and calling it the Captain. I think this is awesome. I love introducing my kids to old games, and I would love introducing them to old games using pieces of nostalgic old hardware. So I think this is very exciting. With that, let's go ahead and jump ahead to the game list, which is very long this week. So let's get to it. All right, starting out with Nintendo, some pretty exciting stuff happening with the Mario Brothers Wonder this week. They released the Switch 2 edition for the game, which gives you basically a better looking game, a little bit, I'll say. I think it's better looking. And an edition called Meetup in Bellabelle Park. So that was something that came out this week. If you haven't played Super Mario Brothers Wonder yet, this might be a great time to do that. You can get it on your Switch 2. And like me, I can get it on my Switch 2 and still have the game. I could basically buy the game for the Switch 1 and get the upgrade for the Switch 2. That way my kids could play it as well. The game that I actually got this week on the Switch 2, which I've been saving up for a while, is Donkey Kong Bonanza. I got it, frankly, because I love the team behind it, the same team that worked, a lot of them, on Mario Odyssey. And you can definitely see the Mario Odyssey vibes coming through in the way that you're getting these bananas and collecting things, and they're kind of like hidden all over the place. It's maybe even a little too open. There's too many places you can go, and you don't know exactly where you're supposed to go. But I'll have to do maybe a review on that in the future, especially as we get closer to a year that it's been out. It could be fun to do a year later. What is Donkey Kong Bonanza like? You'll have to let me know if you're interested in like reviews and stuff like that through this. So other things coming out very shortly here. On May 21st, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book comes out. That looks like it's going to be a great one on Switch 2 for kids. I plan on getting it, honestly, and playing with my youngest son and maybe my youngest daughter as well, because they're both kind of in that stage where they could play along, but they could also just enjoy watching. And it feels like a cartoon. It looks beautiful. I'm very excited for looking at the visuals of this game. And this is the first one that they've announced to be getting that $10 digital reduction in price. So it'll be $59.99, which feels a little better for a Yoshi game, honestly. The next thing kind of announced by Nintendo is this Ocarina of Time remake. It's been hinted at. We don't have like official release information at this point, but I expect we probably will over the course of the next week or so. Probably coming out holidays this year, which is a good time for that. Another game coming out shortly is Pokemon Champions. Pokemon Champions comes out in just over a week on April 8th on the Switch, but also kind of on mobile. And there's kind of mixed feelings about this one because it's got this thing called victory points that you can subscribe to get for $5 a month. So they're basically taking a game that is all about Pokemon and they're trying to squeeze some extra cash out of it. That's the feeling anyway. We don't like that the actual competitive mechanics are kind of a pay-to-win thing. Gating progression is not something that Pokemon has ever been about, and it would be sad if that actually turns out to be the case here. Hopefully, they're willing to do a correction to that. So that's pretty much it for Nintendo. PlayStation Marathon seems to be going well. I know it's we talked about this before. It was released a couple of weeks ago. It is maintaining steady player engagement. So it doesn't look like Marathon is going to go the way of some others that shut down only a couple of weeks afterward. It maybe didn't explode as fast as they anticipated, but they have been making some changes to it, hopefully to make it a little more accessible to people who don't have hours to put in and then lose everything that they just got. So that's the only PlayStation exclusive piece of content. So we'll move on to Xbox. Xbox, this was the week of the partner showcase where they kind of gave us some previews of some of the partner studios with Xbox that are releasing games in the near future. One that I am really excited about is Forza Horizon 6. This is a racing game that is probably one of the best realistic racing games that I have played. My friend Matt actually got me onto Forza Horizon 4. I remember he posted something online like a week before they took it off the store for licensing issues, and I bought it. And it sat in my catalog for quite a while until I just played it last year, and it was so much fun. Driving around the countryside in these realistic, souped-up vehicles and racing on the streets and doing different types of racing across country. Man, I ate that game up. I loved it. And so next on my list is actually to play Forza Horizon 5, which good timing because they just released a bunch of bonus cars that were kind of limited time in the game available, and they're permanently adding them to the in-game store for purchase today. So Forza Horizon 6 is just around the corner, releasing on May 19th of this year, and you will be able to drive around Japan, which is going to be incredible. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be great. Some other games that were announced are The Sands of Ara. That looks like kind of a fun little platformer that will be releasing, actually already released on March 26th. So that's pretty cool. Grave Seasons is another interesting looking game releasing in August of this year. That one's going to be across multiple platforms. What's kind of interesting about this one is it looks like kind of like a pixel art cozy game, Stardew Valley type game, but it's instead, before you buy it for your kids, parents, it features a serial killer and Lovecraftian style demons. So this might not be the one to get your kids if you want them to sleep at night. And if you're a parent like me, you want your kids to sleep at night. Maybe stick with Stardew Valley and don't go Grave Seasons quite yet. The last piece of information kind of on games that have come out recently is Crimson Desert, which we talked about at length. It is doing incredibly well. They sold 3 million copies in 5 days. I think the last figure I saw was 2.4 in 4 days. So they're still selling a ton. There was a little bit of controversy over this because they got found out for having some AI-generated art assets. So this isn't like large portions of the game that were made with AI, to be fair. These are like specific pictures in specific places where there is something that is clearly generated by AI because it just doesn't make sense. And so they actually said, you know what? We didn't even realize that those made it into the game. It was used as a placeholder. We're going to replace it, and we're going to do an audit of the game to make sure that nothing else in the game. I don't know how you audit a game like that for AI art because it is massive, but they're apparently going to do it. And honestly, I'm pretty encouraged by this studio, Pearl Abyss, because of the way that they continue to work on Crimson Desert. They've done things like releasing these patches that are replacing assets with real art. They're adjusting controls. They're adding more storage. They're changing the difficulty level. And so that's actually being kind of noticed in the gaming community, because now we have a mostly positive review in the Steam reviews, at least. Yeah, I love it that developers are listening to the players. Now, the remaining question is, why didn't you have enough people playing this beforehand to actually show you that these issues need to be fixed in the first place? So maybe hire some more beta testers in the future. That's going to help you out a lot with those initial reviews. This makes me think of another game that I continue to play on. This is on Xbox. Is Lightyear Frontier. Lightyear Frontier has been in this like early access version for a long time, years. And I got it quite a while ago and played this original version of it and was able right within the game to give developers feedback. Hey, here's something I noticed. Here's a feature I'd like to see. And they've continued to add those things to the game to the point where they haven't even released the official version of the game yet, because they continue to add things. And the game is totally different from the way it was when it first came out. And that's because of people who got the game early and said, I'm willing to give some feedback on this game and help make it a better game. I love that kind of interaction between developers and players that I see with games like Lightyear Frontier, which is a blast to play and probably something that I'll play again soon because they've changed it so much since the first time I played it. A couple other games that are coming out on either PC or are on multiple platforms. We have MLB The Show 26. I've heard good things about that. If you are a baseball fan, that might be a great game to pick up round about this time of year when baseball season happens. I don't have time to watch a ton of baseball games, but maybe I have time to play a couple of baseball games, especially if it lets me sit on the couch and do that. Another thing, this is it's in PC news, but it's really a retro piece of news, is Bomberman 64 has been made available on PC. So it's a recomp. They're basically putting the game back together as if it were a PC game and adding things like modern controller support and widescreen video to it. So if you're a Bomberman fan, you might look into how to go about getting that. And then we've also got a game called Hades 2 that was announced in that partner showcase. That's going to be on Xbox and PS5. A game called Mouse PI for Hire. Looks like it could be a lot of fun. That's coming out April 26th. We might have to talk about that one a little more in detail next week. And if you are an EverQuest fan, a game called EverQuest Legends is coming out in July of this year. It's supposed to be kind of a solo, casual, friendly, classic EverQuest experience in a PC game. So if you were into EverQuest back in the day, now might be a good time to pick this back up again in July when it comes out. We have another change to Counter-Strike 2. If you've ever played the Counter-Strike games, this was kind of announced a little while ago. Valve released this update that's basically changed the reloading mechanics. So usually in a video game, especially in a shooter, when you stop shooting for a second and walk around a corner, you automatically reload. You hit the reload button because it puts a fresh clip in. You don't lose any ammo. But what they did to Counter-Strike 2 is they said in real life, if you were reloading your video gun, you would lose what was in the clip if you popped out the clip. And so if you reload in Counter-Strike 2 now, before your clip is empty, you lose whatever is in your clip. So this does stop you from wanting to reload all the time because those bullets don't get sent back to your reserves. I think my thoughts on that would be, I know this isn't real life because I don't run around shooting people in real life, of course. This is a video game, so let me keep my ammo, darn it. That's my thought. And then finally, one more update that happened was Hollow Knight. So this game has been around forever. Well, not forever, for 9 years, but that feels like forever. To some of my kids, that is literally forever. So Hollow Knight, they got an update 9 years later to fix like a glitch during the final boss fight. So that is now patched, especially on PC. With that, let's jump into the listener questions. So one of the questions I asked last week was, where is community happening for you when it comes to video games? And the answers that I got ranged from, it really does happen still on the couch with friends of mine when they come over. I was talking to one friend of mine who said, actually, I just recently got a PS5 so that I could sit on the couch with my kids and play these games together. And it's been a lot of fun. So he's been enjoying that. Another person I heard from said, have you considered like a Discord server? So where you talk about, and basically a chat room, essentially, right? Discord. So you can chat about stuff like this in an environment with other people who want to talk about that. I think that's the question that I got was, are you going to do this for the game adventure? And I think it's quite possible that I'll do this for the game adventure, whether that's Discord or a similar type of service where there's a place that we can continue to talk about, dialogue about these things over the course of the week. I think that's a great idea. So maybe that's something that'll come down the line eventually. But a lot of what I heard was, we don't know. And so this is a question maybe that's worth continuing to ask is, where is community happening? Maybe it's around a podcast like this one where we listen together and we interact and we talk about it later. Maybe that's where one of the places that community is happening. But it also tells me that a lot of people are looking for community and they don't know where to find it. So that's kind of maybe a more interesting question than just talking about video games, maybe something that I need to revisit in the future. Today, the question that I have for you is this. If you could make any remaster happen, or remake, we'll say, any remaster or remake happen of a favorite game from your childhood, what would that game be and what would you change? What would you add to the game? Would you do a remake or a remaster? Would you keep the graphics the same or update them? I'd love to hear what you think about a game that you've played, specifically one that you've played a long time ago or even as a kid, that you would love to see remastered, and how you would go about doing that remaster or remake. And you can send the answers to that question and any question to me at thisisthegameadventure@gmail.com. You can also find me on social media as The Game Adventure. I'll see you next time.